Hearing a lot of twists and spins and propaganda and statements that are simply not true. So many, in fact, I don't have my 5 minutes would be exhausted trying to address even just a fraction of them. We live today in a headline culture. So many people just read the headline and they don't read the article. So they hear a statement and they think, oh, this is a learned person. It must be true. In fact, what's the title of this very hearing? It's Democracy in Danger. That gets your attention. And it goes further and says, the assault on voting rights in Texas, the assault, as if a crime is being committed. And the second paragraph of the memorandum that we were given about the hearing says the Texas legislature, or this Texas legislation, would dramatically restrict access for voters across the state. And it goes on specifically to mention the proposal about banning drive-through voting and 24-hour voting. Dramatically restrict. Let's think about that. It fails to mention that of the 254 counties in Texas, 253 of them had none, zero drive-through or 24-hour voting. All of Texas, and there's 99% of us Texans did not utilize drive-through voting or the 24-hour voting. And that's not to say that the folks that did go and use the 24-hour voting after 7 and before 7 a.m., they could have voted. It's not to say they wouldn't have voted. They could have, just like we all did. I'm disheartened that 50 of my former Democratic colleagues abandoned our home state and came here to Washington, D.C. It's unfortunate that some, or more like, not the three here today, but more like carnival barkers than serious deliberative legislators. The phony arguments and baseless claims are hyperbolic in the extreme, completely disingenuous and patently untrue. In the aforementioned memorandum issued by the majority about this hearing, in that same second paragraph, it says that Texas has a long history of attempting to suppress Black and Latino voters, and it's been judged the hardest state in which to cast a ballot, which we already addressed. But that's inflammatory and it's an accusatory. And where do they cite? So they cite the Guardian newspaper, not an American newspaper, a far-left newspaper in Great Britain. And instead of citing foreigners on other continents for their opinions on Texas voting, why don't we see what Texans themselves think? There was a poll done last week by RMG Research, and in Texas, they asked Texans, is it easy to vote in Texas, is it hard, or is it about right? 75% said it's easier, it's about right. Only 16% said it was hard. You break it down demographically, it was 79% to 14 amongst whites, 64 to 21 amongst African Americans, and 75 to 20 with Hispanics. So the results are in, and it's a landslide that the vast majority of Texans believe it's just about right or easy to vote. I'd like to ask my three former colleagues very quickly, and it's because of time, just yes or no, do you support or oppose voter ID? Ms. Thompson, or Representative Thompson?
You know, my vote was no.
You voted no in 2011. You all weren't able to vote because you weren't in the legislature in 2011.
I support expanding voter ID to include student IDs that are issued by state schools, yes.
So you support voter ID. You would have voted yes in 2011 if you were in the legislature?
I don't know that bill, so
Okay.
I couldn't tell you.
Okay. Representative Bernal?
Like she does, I think expanded voter ID works.
Okay. So you support voter ID?
I support the concept of voter ID, not Texas's version of voter ID.
Well, I remember 2011, wasn't in the legislature at the time, but Democrats voted en masse against the voter ID bill at the time. And that's completely out of step with Texans because Texans overwhelmingly support voter ID that we have in the books. 82% to 11. Again, breaking it down demographically, it's overwhelming. 84, 75, and 81% respectively support voter ID. Representative Thompson, you believe the current legislation being proposed in Texas has an adverse effect on turnout in Texas? You think turnout's going to go down?
I do.
Okay. Again, in voter ID in 2011, there were the same concerns, and that's I remember hearing that it was, but they were all ill-placed or worse fabricated because from 2008, the last time we had an election, presidential election in Texas, that didn't have voter ID, to 2020, and the last one when we had it, turnout went up 39.25%. In our population did rise 19.7%, but it still outpaced 2 to 1. And it's the same doom and gloom that we're hearing now about this is going to affect voter turnout. So it's fair to say that the Democrats in our state were wrong then, and I'd argue that they're wrong now. Mr. Chair, I'm going to have to yield back because I'm out of time.
All right. Well, thank you for your reflections. And we go now to the chair of the full committee, Chairman Maloney, for